Welcome into the Through the Whistle podcast, brought to you by the Chicago Sports Network. That is Jake Butt, former Michigan Wolverine. He was an All-American tight end there. He's also the game analyst in the number one booth for the Big Ten Network. I am Joshua Perry. I played my college ball at The Ohio State University. I was a linebacker, team captain, and national champion. You can also catch me on NBC in Peacock covering Big Ten football. Jake, big night last night, and I'm not talking about the election. I'm talking about the college football playoff poll was released the first time in the 12-team era. I'll run through the top 12 here real quick, and then we can discuss it. But at number 1, you have Oregon. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Georgia. 4, Miami. 5, Texas. And you have Penn State at 6, Tennessee at 7, Indiana at 8, BYU at 9, Notre Dame at 10, Alabama at 11, and Boise State there at 12. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you saw from the initial poll there.
Yeah, honestly, there really wasn't any major surprises. I thought the committee, for the most part, did a good job. And then you have the rankings, and then you have the seeding, which is something I know we're going to dive into. So it's fun to it's just fun to see it and start to look like if we played the playoffs next week, we'd be looking at a playoff game being hosted by Ohio State, Penn State, Texas, even Indiana would be hosting one, or Tennessee, depending on, I'm sure the committee would find a way to get Tennessee to host that one.
No doubt.
But it's exciting. Really not too much drama. Now really is when the drama starts. I thought the committee did a good job and for the most part got it right.
Yeah, I'll say this real quick on your thought there about who's hosting games. Like, imagine if Indiana did get in position to host a playoff game. You'd have 3 games in the North in December. You'd have, in Alabama, for example, might have to travel to play a Penn State or something like that. When we get down the line here, it'd be a really interesting thing to see how they respond to the cold weather.
When you were growing up, was that always like a narrative by your friends and family? Like, man, the SEC, they get home games. They get to host the playoffs or the bowl games. Like, did your friends and family always say they should come play some bowl games up north? Now we're going to
It was always a thing. Like, one of the things that we said in recruiting, I'm sure you guys said it there at Michigan, but like, we used to get guys from Florida, we get guys from Texas, California, and it would be tough because when we were playing, you did the official visits during the fall. And so our big official weekend was before National Signing Day. So it'd be somewhere either during bowl season or shortly thereafter. And you'd get these guys who don't even own a winter jacket. But what we would tell them is, hey man, if you're trying to play in the league, you got to go to Lambeau.
Smart.
If you're playing in the league, you got to go to Cleveland. You got to play outside of Buffalo. You got to go to Boston and play a game. So it is fun to think about some of these guys who've never really spent time in cold weather having to do that a little bit. I did want to talk about a couple of things that stood out to me in the rankings, and then we'll talk about seeding here in a sec. I'll start with BYU, and I know a lot of people had an issue with where BYU is ranked. They're number 9. They would be a team that would get a first-round bye if this playoff were to go today because they are the top team from the Big 12. But, again, they are sitting there at 9. A lot of people are pointing to their resume and saying, well, this doesn't make a ton of sense because this is a much better team than they're getting credit for. They've got a couple of top 25 wins. They don't have any losses. How could BYU be a team that's just sitting there at 9? I would bring this argument out for you. So they played Baylor. Baylor was a team at the beginning of the year that many people thought had a coach on the hot seat in Dave Aranda. They're not a great football team. That was a 1-possession win for BYU. Let them come back in that game. They were outgained, and they threw 3 interceptions. Oklahoma State having a down year. They're a 3-win team right now. BYU won that game by 3 points. They had to do it on a last drive, and they were the beneficiaries of some awful tackling from Oklahoma State. They threw 3 picks in that game. You have Kansas State. They beat Kansas State badly. They were also outgained by Kansas State by 126 yards. I think that folks look at the way that they've won in a conference that's not very tough, and they're like, it's a little bit fluky. And so I think this is an interesting thing here because BYU is in a great spot. They would have one of the first-round buys. I don't think they could be mad about it. I also think an undefeated power conference team, I understand where they feel like they're being disrespected. The other thing I will say about this BYU thing is they're at 9, Boise State's at 12. Who's to say that if BYU loses a game and they're still ahead of Iowa State, who's sitting there at 17 right now at 7-1, and they win the Big 12, that Boise State wouldn't be the team that gets the bye, because the bye is not just for the power conference teams. It's for one of 5 conference champs, and Boise State would be in position for that. Who is to say that BYU doesn't make it to a conference championship game undefeated, lose there, whoever beats them, they get the automatic bid, and Boise State goes to win out, and they're the number 4 team because of seeding. These are things you should be paying attention to. To me, it's kind of like, what's the gap between that last Power 4 team that would get a bye and the group of 5 team that's sitting there trying to get the last bye too?
Yeah, that's an important distinction. I don't know, that's not. I don't think that's been talked about enough. Where it's not just the major 4 conference winners that get the bye, right? The committee has some flexibility. It could be a Boise State that gets that first round bye. But I will say, just to go back to the BYU, I get it. I get both arguments where, hey, you're undefeated. We have to acknowledge the record. But, hey, you've also looked sloppy a little bit. So what are we doing here? But we can't go to a world where record doesn't matter, okay? Like, because as soon as you go to that world, this is going to be 6 SEC teams and 6 Big Ten teams, right? Then you start to get into the world of speculation. So even though they've looked sloppy, it's a binary sport, winner, loser. Got to acknowledge the win.
I disagree with that. I think the NFL is binary. I think college football is open for speculation, and it should be, because BYU didn't have to play Georgia, so they don't get to have a blemish like Texas does, right? Like BYU did not play Alabama. BYU does not play Oregon. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Penn State. They don't have that opportunity, in my opinion, to be on display against one of the best teams in the regular season and potentially lose that game. So to me, honestly, I don't have a problem with this, because I think it acknowledges the fact that in college football, you're not necessarily as good as your record states, because the balance of the conferences is just so far apart. If we're talking about an NFL thing, I think you just rock right off of the records, and like maybe there's a little bit of variance in the true parity of who they play. But I do think objectively you can look and say that they have not faced, nor will they face in the regular season or their conference championship game, an Oregon, Ohio State, a Georgia, a Texas, a Penn State, an Indiana even. They're not going to face a team like that.
But I'd also say they haven't had the chance to face Kentucky and look really shaky against them, and somehow that be a credited win. Or they don't.
Yeah, no, they had the chance to face Baylor.
Like
they had the chance to face Baylor and Oklahoma State, which are 2 teams that are not very good, and look shaky against both of them. Yeah, so they have had that opportunity.
Okay, but still, like if it's Kentucky instead of Baylor, we'd give them more credit because Kentucky's the SEC. Or if it's Vandy instead of Oklahoma State, we'd say, and I understand Vandy's actually, decent this year, but it's still like part of this is built in, so we can't just have the entire board be SEC and Big Ten teams. Like, hey, because if you win this is part of the fun of college football, is the opportunity. Like,
are we in it for fun, or are we trying to figure out who the best 12 teams are?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. We don't know. That's why you play these games. That's why we have the conference champ of the Big 12 has a chance to go up against, the winner of the Big 10 or the SEC. Like, we get to figure it out. If
you were Vegas and you had to set neutral field odds for Texas and BYU, what's the spread?
Yeah, I mean, probably about 10 points, give it maybe a little bit more. Like, right?
Yeah, I'd say 14 or so.
About that, yeah.
And I think that's kind of the point of why I can't be too upset about it is, like, yes, I get you're 8-0, and I respect winning. I do think winning is the most important thing, to your point. But, like, we'd be mad. You're going to get your bye if you continue to win, right? Like, you're going to be there. So, like,
you're talking to people that think BYU should be ranked higher.
No. That's what I'm getting at. I mean, and I'll give you the argument that I was hearing, and I do think there's some credibility to it. There are people that ask the question, and it's a legitimate question: what is Texas's best win? And you would probably point to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, it's not Michigan.
Right?
I mean, yeah.
We thought it was, and
Yeah.
it turned out not to be a great win. We thought Oklahoma was a better win at the time than it ended up being. It's probably Vanderbilt at this point. And so people are saying, how does Texas, with one loss and their best win being Vanderbilt, get ranked over a team that is undefeated with a couple of top 25 wins? They have one early in the year, 3-point win over SMU, and then they have the K-State win, which is number 19 team right now, that they blew out. And I do think that there is like, okay, this is kind of a thing. But the thing that I get back to is, well, they haven't played, Georgia, right? Like I think we have a different view of BYU if they play Georgia because they're losing that football game.
Yeah.
And guess what? Both quarterbacks might throw 3 interceptions in that game. We watch Georgia play games like that all the time. But the reality is they figured out ways to win them. They even came back against Alabama in a terrible game that they played. So I think that's where I'm like, let's not get too mad about it because BYU is still in a position where they're one of the top 4 conference champs at this point. They would squarely be in the bracket with a bye. Like, sorry you got disrespected, but your schedule is also trash, and I think the committee's trying to acknowledge that.
And to that point, like that's with that, like that's why they're ranked. That's why this is a fair ranking for them. I honestly feel the same way about Miami, where it's like, okay, you're winning games, but man, it hasn't looked pretty. You can score points with the best of them, but you haven't dominated for 4 quarters. Really, what's their best win is Louisville. Outside of that, it's not been challenging.
I'm with you there on Miami. They are a super fluky team. I think they get the benefit.
They can put up points.
They get the benefit of Cam Ward, right? Yeah. Like they were in a 1-point game in the 4th quarter against Duke, and all of a sudden they're winning by 20. They put up 53 points in that game.
They're like, it's Warriors from a few years ago.
We all watched that Cal game. It was a late night game. They were down. They were down 25 points in that game and came back.
And there was some controversy at the end and all that with their officiating. Yes.
But that's the thing about Miami. I wouldn't have been mad if Miami was ranked lower. But then again, you get to kind of like, there's this Texas divide in the top 5 where it's like, could you legitimately put Texas in above Miami? Texas has also had their moments. Everybody's super flawed, and I think it makes this a little bit more challenging. The final thing I'll say, and I promise we'll get to the actual bracket and where they have them seated right now. Indiana below Penn State is a crime against humanity. It is one of the crimes of crimes. What's Penn State's best win right now?
Illinois.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It ain't much better than Indiana's best win is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're undefeated, and they've blown everybody out. They have not played a close game yet.
Indiana's blown their opponents out more than Penn State almost. I feel like
it's not almost. I mean, it is pretty clear, right? Like, and we'll see about Indiana when they play Ohio State. And I'm not trying to get to that, but the idea to me is you can look at those resumes and say that they're pretty comparable in terms of their top wins, the game control for Indiana, the way that they've blown those games out, and the fact that they're undefeated 9-0 right now in the Big Ten. I think they should be above a 7-1 Penn State. Now we're splitting hairs, and these are the things that we complain about. And like the first ranking is going to change 100 times before it actually matters. But I do think it's important that they tell us where they're at, and they kind of set the table for pathways with this initial ranking. Like the Big 12 to me, not a lot of pathways. Second highest ranked team is sitting there at 17. When I look at the ACC, they've got a decent pathway with SMU, right? Like, it's just things that you start to think about what chips would have to fall. And I think that's why people get so fired up about these initial rankings.
You're right, though. I mean, it will all be revealed. And that's what makes this, that's probably one of the big takeaways too, is how many teams we're talking about at this point in the season. Like that makes it so much more fun because we're 20 deep of teams that really, we're really not even, we haven't even eliminated teams. That's the thing. We haven't even started eliminating teams because there's 20 plus teams that have a real chance of getting in it.
It's the interesting thing that I think about it because of the conference races. Like the SEC has been one where it feels like the more games that have been played, the more teams that are actually in the mix. Yeah. Because you don't have that one team that's undefeated in conference and, like they're just in control firmly. Like I saw a tweet that said that there's a scenario where there could be like a 7 or 8 way tie.
Oh yeah,
in that conference.
Yeah,
you know.
I hope one of those tweets always come about. I want to see it happen one time. Though.
Oh, I would love
to think about. I want to see it happen one time.
It would make me so happy. All right, let's talk about this bracket, and we'll go through the first round matchups as they are right now. So you would have Ohio State hosting Boise State in the first round. It'd be super fun matchup, like the big brand kind of versus the team that was the BCS Buster before we even got to the playoffs.
Yeah,
they've got a Heisman Trophy candidate right now. Like a lot of intrigue there. You mentioned Tennessee. They would be hosting Indiana. Tennessee is kind of one of those teams that's like reemerged over the last few years. Indiana's a basketball school that's like the Cinderella of this year. I think intrigue there. You've got Texas and you've got Alabama, 2 blue blood programs, 2 programs from the SEC that people had high expectations for coming in. And then finally, you would have Penn State hosting Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is the team that people tried to count out in week 2. They're trying to return to prominence, haven't won a title since the 80s. And Penn State, the team that this system was built for, hosting a game would be an electric atmosphere. Give me your thoughts on some of these first round matchups if this were the bracket today.
But this is why we were so excited about this. Like, I just want to hear from the alarmist that says death to college football. Tell me you're not excited looking at this bracket. The one thing above all I'm interested in, and okay, so look at the Ohio State ranking right there. So Ohio State controls their own destiny. They can, win out, rematch Oregon in the national or in the Big Ten championship. Say they win, the fact that they're ranked number 2, not seeded number 2, they're ranked number 2. If they beat Oregon in the rematch, they'd become the 1 seed. That 5 seed in this scenario is very coveted, in my opinion. Like Ohio State, if you're thinking about Ohio State, would you rather almost have this because you get to host a game versus Boise? You're favored in that one by at least probably 13.5, 14. Then you're playing BYU, which we already did our due diligence on, and say, man, the Buckeyes will be favored heavily in that one again. Like, okay, so the 1 seed is great, but the 5 seed almost looks like it has a chance to be really coveted here.
Yeah, the 5 seed certainly feels like a spot because what a lot of people believe, and this could certainly change, but you would get the group of 5 champion is what a lot of people believe is that the highest that they would be is 12. I think there is a chance that Boise State could elevate higher than that. And then you'd be playing one of these teams, potentially like an SMU type, an A&M. Those are the first 2 teams out. Or a Notre Dame or an Alabama gets bumped back. But certainly a team that's flawed. Then you would have the last champ that gets in. And this is where it becomes interesting because we could also be looking at this as a scenario as maybe your first round, if BYU were to make it to the conference championship game and lose, maybe your first round is actually in Iowa State. And then your second round is Boise State.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people are looking at this 5 spot as definitely like, you're probably not the number 5 team. You're probably a team inside the top 4 that got bumped out because of seeding.
Yep.
And you would have a really good opportunity to make a run. The interesting thing about this bracket too, just looking at the top half, since we're right there, is there's a likelihood of an Ohio State, Oregon 3rd game, which would be electric.
Yeah. Just tell me about that as a player, though, Joshua, because a lot of people would say, oh, it waters it down, and it's not.
Water me down. Water me down.
Water me down. Drench me.
I want to be hydrated, baby.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, like I disagree with. I think that those are people from outside the arena. Like you're telling me the Buckeyes don't want a rematch versus the Ducks and say they get them there. You're telling me the Ducks wouldn't say, all right, we want to go. This is like the law of nature. Right. This is like how mankind operates on the earth. 3 times. Like we always, hey, rock, paper, scissors, best out of 3. Like, come on, that would be really, really exciting.
And this one's for all the marbles, right? Like there's not another rematch after that one. That whoever wins that one won the whole series, regardless of whether they're coming in 2-0 or 0-2. Right. That would be the interesting thing there. Indiana, just talking about pathways for them, I think they are one of those teams that I would personally not like to see in a playoff scenario.
No.
And the reason why is Curt Cignetti, he thinks he's winning every damn game.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, his players believe they're winning all of them.
Oh, yeah.
And you get them with maybe a little extra time to prepare, and just everything is on the line.
Yep.
You know, you have to win. I would put money on him to get it done.
And they don't make mistakes either. Like they don't have negative plays. They don't turn the ball over. They're pretty healthy for the most part. Like they're well-rounded in all three phases. Of course not. I will say, I'm going to state the obvious a bit here, but health and like roster and schedule management are going to be critical here for teams. And I was told that Indiana, you have 15 spring practices. Cignetti, we know him as a tough guy and a hard worker. They only did 13 spring practices. He felt 13 was good enough. And I think that alludes to what I'm saying. I think he's the type of guy that's going to be able to keep his team fresh. They have hour and 45-minute practices. They're in and out. I can just tell you that's not the case for every single coach. I know some more programs in the Big Ten that are beat up right now, veteran teams that ran their guys into the ground because that's what we do. So I think roster management, health management, team management is going to play a big factor in this as well.
It was interesting, man. Urban Meyer, maniacal worker, right? And this guy who I played for in college, our practices were difficult, man. It was a battle in practice, especially Tuesday, Wednesday practices early in the season. We were getting after it. He had this natural taper to it, though, where by the end of the year, it was just the right amount of work. It was the right amount of physicality to maintain an edge, but none of us felt like we were getting ready to go out on a Saturday and our legs were shot and we had bumps and bruises from during the week. And then we would get into the postseason and he would do it in phases, Jake. So our first phase, we would come back and it'd be like the first, 4, maybe 5 practices where it was a conditioning emphasis. So the older guys, a lot of times we would come out in shells. We'd have spiders on and just pants, and he'd make the young guys stay after and they bring their pads out. But we go through, and a lot of it was volume for our legs and for our lungs. So there was no inside drill because we're not wearing pads, but we talk about a lot of 7-on-7. We were doing a lot of half field passing. We went team drills, but a lot of it was the pass game. And then we would play Buckeye ball at the end, basically just run around a condition.
Yeah.
Then the next phase was more of we have to get back to playing football. So we threw the pads on, a little bit more physical. We went back to inside drill, whatever. And then finally we would get to our game week where it felt like a normal game week. But it was a true ramp up to make sure that we were going to be well conditioned. The second part made sure that our fundamentals were going to be on point. One of the things about bowl games, you get that time off, guys forget how to tackle, right? Like guys forget how to pursue to the football with good angles. We never missed any of that. And the only reason I share that is I think it's going to be important for coaches to have a plan like that, and especially with the playoff where it's not a traditional postseason anymore. Curt Cignetti probably has all of that already mapped out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I have similar stories too with Jim. So Michigan's coming off a national title run. In my senior year, we got to go to the Orange Bowl. And we were a veteran team. We had 11 guys get drafted, 17 make NFL rosters from that class alone. So, we were a veteran team. And Coach Harbaugh, because, you can squeeze something so hard because you want it so bad, you squeeze it to death. And I feel like, that was a New Year's Six Bowl, and Coach Harbaugh called it Christmas camp and ran us into the ground. And we were not fresh. And it showed up. Florida State was playing at a different speed. Their first run where they met Georgia, also, I believe, in the Orange Bowl, that he called that Christmas camp, talking to the guys. He grinded and grinded because he wanted it so bad. I made sure to ask about it this year before they played Alabama and then ultimately Washington. The guys said, we've never seen anything like this with Coach Harbaugh. He's been able to keep us fresh. The practice reps are down. We feel great going into the games. That's the value of having a veteran, experienced head coach that's able to learn from his past mistakes. So, it sounds like Urban figured that out. Jim figured it out. And some of these coaches this time around are going to have to figure it out as well.
No doubt. It's a real challenge. And you're balancing also getting young guys ready for their future careers and how much you want to work them. And it's tough. I don't ever want to fault a coach for trying to get the most work in that they can, but I do think you lose sight of the bigger picture sometimes of Jim Harbaugh. You told me that he loved the quote, more is more, right? Like it never is it less is more. And I do think more is more, but there is this like law of diminishing returns where more might be too much. Less may never be more, but more might be too much.
Yeah, it inverts. It's more is more, and then the chart gets flipped upside down, and dudes start getting injured, and freaking everyone's pissed off, and all that stuff. So it inverts.
More is more is one of my favorite things that you told me that he said. It is funny? I will never forget that. More is more, and I agree. More is more. All right,
hey, before we get off of this, think about this real quick. Dan Lanning.
Yeah,
a young, bright head coach. Like that's a decision he's going to have to make. Never been to the playoffs. James Franklin, does he want it? Never been to the playoffs. Marcus Freeman, same thing. So it does matter. It's a sneaky thing that matters.
No, the Dan Lanning thing I do think is a good point too, because he is a guy who it feels like loves the margins and loves the boundaries and plays with fire a little bit in the way that he coaches. And probably he wants to be edgy in the preparation so he can feel like they went all in. But to that point, it's like when you're young, sometimes you don't have that experience to fall back on. Yep. I like that you brought that up. And you also brought up Marcus Freeman. We should talk about Notre Dame here for a sec. A lot of people, after they lost to NIU, said there's no path to the playoff. I was always very much if you win, you're probably in. Like, this is built for a one-loss Notre Dame, regardless of the loss, to probably be in. Here they are, number 10. They would be traveling to Happy Valley if this were the bracket for the postseason. Do you like Notre Dame's path here just in terms of being able to actually be in it by the end of the year? They got Florida State coming up this week, who's terrible. They've still got Army, who's a good football team. They're ranked. Do you like the path?
I do. In Notre Dame, it's interesting because initially I'd be like, good for Notre Dame, but they're not going to win it all. And then I look at this path and I say, they've been decimated by injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Riley Leonard has looked shaky, and yet maybe they're finding something with him. Maybe and remember, he was injured all off season, so some of this is to be expected. He's probably getting healthier, feeling better, getting a little bit more confident. And then I think about, certainly they can beat Penn State. What most people are going to assume is they're going to lose to Georgia. Carson Beck gives that ball away, man. And
Notre Dame secondary, even with the injuries.
Yep. So, do I like their chances? I'm getting all the way back around to say, actually, I do think they could pull it off. I mean, they would need to be effectively perfect. Riley Leonard would have to play above himself, and then that secondary would need to take advantage of opportunities. But, man, Carson Beck just does not look comfortable right now. I don't know. God, we were talking about him people were saying he's a number 1 overall pick prospect, a first-round prospect. I do not see that at all. He looks kind of lost without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. I don't know, man. That's a defensive-led team by a long shot, and Carson Beck looks kind of like just a guy out there. So Notre Dame can certainly beat him.
Yeah, no, he looks bad. They are winning in spite of Carson Beck right now. And I don't know if that's a formula. If they could even take it into an SEC championship game and look like a team that we would have confidence in a playoff scenario. And I will say for Notre Dame, like Riley Leonard, much better. I have been a doubter. I was a doubter when Notre Dame got him. He started off the season, didn't look great. They have built the offense to flow much better. A lot of play action, a lot of RPO. They let him use his legs. And they've got a good run game to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I think they're rounding out, and the finish to the season is going to be important because they don't have margin of error, but they also don't have a conference championship game. Like, it is a very they can put the blinders on for the final quarter of the season here. Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of the games we have coming up this weekend. We'll start with our big game of the week that we talk about on the Big College Football Show. Y'all can catch that Monday through Thursday on CHSN 5 Central. Michigan going to Bloomington to take on the Indiana Hoosiers. Kurt Signetti, he mentioned that they got to be all in. All focus is on Michigan. He's also kind of like, good defense, right? Got some players. They can run the ball at 11, 12, 13 personnel. Seems like they found their quarterback. He spins it. That's a program with a lot of tradition. They got a lot of pride over there. Like, it's almost like listen, we know exactly what they are and we think we're better.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's the funny thing. Everything we just talked about their ranking, I think it's the best thing that could have happened to him. I think secretly Cignetti was hoping Indiana was ranked a little bit lower so he could just go off and continue to like energize the team and feel, because I do think a lot of this is mental for Indiana. They've proven that they're capable of not just playing with anyone, beating anyone. They're dominating teams. But now it's mental. And, our coaches would say, be allergic to the big meal, eat crumbs, don't eat the rat poison, whatever phrase you want to say. Like, that's what this weekend is about, where all of a sudden Indiana, you're favored against Michigan. Who would have ever thought that day would come? And yet it's a fair point. So Cignetti's going to have to find a way to get his team to continue to play inspired and angry and like they have something to prove. I have no doubt that he's the guy to do that. From an X's and O's standpoint, I look back. One of the foundation of Indiana's offense, the O-line has played really, really well. And I know some guys on the Joe Moore Award, their board, they're a team that the Joe Moore Award has been watching that has played really, really well. The best D-line they've played this year is probably Nebraska, with Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker, and they came to play and moved those dudes. Michigan's D-line is a different beast, though. And we know that Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, and Josiah Stewart, those guys are good enough where they can actually take over the game. They really can take over the game as a defensive line. That's what I'm looking at here. And I think it'll be a good indicator because the Buckeyes got a great D-line too. How well do the Hoosiers handle that battle up front is going to be an indication of what this season will end up being for the Hoosiers as a whole.
I mean, I think that's what it comes down to, simply because I think the way Indiana plays, they'll have their matchups in the secondary. And the other thing about that too, man, is to that point, I think Michigan's D-line is actually going to have to be more impactful when it comes to stopping the run, when it comes to the run game. Make Indiana play from behind the sticks. This is an offense that loves to be on schedule. They like to get the football out quick. Give yourself an opportunity to rush the passer by creating longer yardage situations where your guys can really shine. I think that's probably going to be the biggest thing there, because otherwise I do think Indiana is going to be able to kind of pick some of their matchups that they like on the outside and be able to create leverage the way that they do through the numbers game. It's difficult to defend. But if they can be really effective TFLs on first down when it comes to the run game, I think that's where the game can kind of turn a little bit in Michigan's favor here. Indiana's favored by 14. Do you think that that's proper?
It seems like a lot, doesn't it? It seems like a lot, but based on everything I've seen this year, it seems fair. I will say I feel like Michigan is trending in a positive direction. Like Davis Warren, I mean, he's not a elite quarterback, but he's stable. And the fact that they're not turning the ball over with him, he's not throwing it to the other team. And the fact that they have had no sacks the past 2 weeks, like those are positive indicators that say, hey, maybe Michigan can make this one close. I agree with you, Joshua, about Michigan having to create some negative plays. I just had to pull it back up again. Indiana's offensive line, they're second in TFLs allowed, and they're first in sacks allowed. Like the O-line, they don't go backwards. They don't have negative plays. So I do think that'll decide the game. Can Michigan kind of break that trend or not?
It is a hell of a deal, man. Indiana, we've been just singing their praises, but they are playing fantastic football here. I wanted to talk about the Penn State rebound. They've got Washington coming to town. It's a night game. It's their whiteout. It's on Peacock, so I know fans are going to be mad about that. But they do get their night game whiteout situation. What do you think the rebound looks like? And do you think this is a good opponent to try to get right against?
I think regardless of the opponent, the environment is the key here. That going back home, they've been waiting for that whiteout. It's different, man. It's like a shot in the butt. It's like a shot of adrenaline, man. It's like the Michael Jordan secret juice in in
Space Jam.
Space Jam. That's what it is. That's what I think is the key here. I do think it's a worthy opponent where Washington is probably better than their record might lead you to believe. They've beaten themselves and made mistakes. So it forces James Franklin to talk to his team and say, guys, we have to be dialed into our process. But man, that game was just so disappointing and so deflating. Their leading rusher was a tight end. Their second leading rusher was their quarterback. Their leading receiver, Penn State, was a running back. What the heck? Like it's okay. If you're playing, I don't even play poker, but if you go to the casino and you're playing poker, at some point you push all your chips on the table, and if you lose, it's deflating. Like they pushed all their chips on the table going to get Kotelnicki and Tom Allen to coordinate the defense. And hey, it's Drew Allers ready to take that step. And they go get Julian Fleming and all this stuff. And they lose. And they had so many opportunities to win. I hope for their sake it's a bounce back week because this season, as we mentioned with the playoff bracket, it still can be special, but there's a mental side to football, an emotional side to football that's why analytics don't work as well in football, in my opinion. That it's going to be hard to overcome.
You know, it's interesting. The further away I get from that game and on the Penn State side, the more I think that the loss can be disastrous. And I know that sounds dramatic. Jake, they were up 10-0 in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Will Howard's first pass attempt was a pick six. Crowd was into it. They were into it. They had Ohio State in a situation where they're playing with their guard at tackle. They're playing with their third guard, right? And it's just like a team who could not run the football. And they had them on the ropes with the crowd involved, and Ohio State just chipped their way back in. They even almost caught another break. Okay, Will Howard is running into the end zone, and it's a touchdown. And my guy's ball security was in hell. And just the ball, boop, pops out, goes over the pylon. It's a touchback. That's another 7 points that they were able to avoid in terms of disaster. They had the ball twice inside the 5-yard line in goal-to-go situations. They threw an interception on one. They got stuffed on the other. And the second time after they got stuffed, still 5 minutes on the clock in a 7-point game with an opportunity to force a punt, get the ball back, and go down and try to score. Yeah. And Ohio State takes all 5 minutes and 13 seconds or whatever it was with 11 straight runs down their throat with that offensive line and that run game that could not run it the week before, and they win the freaking ball game. That is disastrous when you actually start to think about what happened in that ball game.
Listen, you just laid it out. And what's also disastrous is, I want to just define Penn State. And I was like, hey, maybe it isn't all too bad. Like, it's not that Penn State is a bad team. It's that they have to accept that they have to fully accept that they aren't who they thought they were. And that's a daunting thought because they believed going into that game that they were ready to take that step. James Franklin, his press conference was dedicated towards taking the next step. And then you lose the way you did. The Buckeyes, man, your Buckeyes tried to give it to them. They
did. There were numerous situations where they were like, "Hey, man, let's just let Penn State win this bad boy." And to their credit, they punched back every time something bad happened to them. But they made Penn State tap out of that game. If we're being honest, that last drive, those boys said, "I don't want any more."
Yeah. That's why it's like that's where I like what you're saying here. And that's why it's so important because it really could be disastrous. Because watching that film, you have to sit there and say, everything we hoped was going to happen happened. It was there for the taking, and we couldn't take it. We could not take it.
Yep.
So what? I don't know. So where do you go from here? I don't know.
And that's the thing is if they mentally are playing Ohio State again this week, that's going to be a problem for them, right? Yeah. Like you can't let Ohio State beat you 2 weeks in a row. And to that point, I think Washington has the ability to go in there and get a win.
They have enough.
Will Rogers, veteran dude, very efficient. Jonah Coleman has been phenomenal. We talked about Boston, the wide receiver. I don't know if you guys aren't familiar with him. I know they're on the West Coast. They're new to the Big Ten. You should watch him. He is big. He's got great body control. He's physical, bit of an alien. He's the type of dude that can give you problems in a secondary where Ohio State was able to get open, right? And then flip it over. If that run game looked like it did against Ohio State, they ain't going to be able to throw the ball on Washington. It's a good pass defense. You talk about it all the time, Jake.
Where's the run game for Penn State? Where is the run game? Seriously, where the heck is the run game? I don't know. It's a rhetorical question. I don't know. Where the heck is the run game?
So this is what I've settled on with their run game is I do think that their offensive line is not great. I think they're a very average offensive line. I've also gotten to the conclusion that we might have sold a little bit too much how good both of those backs were. I do think that they're premium backs, but they're not, are they the best running back room in the Big Ten? Are they the best running back room in the nation? I can't get there with them.
No, I can't either.
Too many times they've not been able to come through when you need the running backs to just dominate the game.
Yeah, this is the whole thing about, again, with the theme of the college football playoff. Congrats, Penn State. You now get to say you made the playoff, but nothing about your program has changed. So I still have an issue with that. Like, cool, you can label yourself as made the playoff. Do you really feel much better? Do you really no, you still need to take that step as a program.
All right, we'll finish off with this one. We only got a few minutes left here. Does Minnesota keep their hot streak going? I mean, outside of the undefeateds, they're the hottest team in the Big Ten.
Yes, and the reason it should even be a hotter streak if it weren't for missing a field goal week 1 versus North Carolina and certainly some controversy versus Michigan. Like, they're even better than their record has shown. It's been cool to see them have a passing game with Max Brosmer. Look, he's not winning the Heisman, he's not winning the Big Ten Quarterback of the Year, but he's been as efficient of a passer as they've had for a while. And of course, we know what their running game is with Darius Taylor, and the offensive line looks good. They're a true team. Like, they play good complementary football offensively, and then complementary football offense to defense. That's a team that is quality enough where they can make some noise. They could beat Penn State in a few weeks too. So who knows?
They really could. It's interesting because you're making this argument, and it sounds crazy, but if you've watched this Minnesota team, it's really not. They could be 7-8-1 right now. They could be ranked like 17, 18 nationally.
Yeah.
Right.
And they don't do anything special. Okay. Like, they're not a dynamic team. There's nothing really too special about them. But they do a lot of things really well. And occasionally, there's a few times where they'll have one guy step up and be special for a moment. And that's really all you need to win some of these games. Yeah,
Coy Parrish, the freshman safety, is one of those guys who's been pretty special. PJ Fleck, I say this all the time when I talk about Minnesota, but I feel like I need to iterate this because he catches a lot of heat. And I understand all of the reasons why. Personality, certainly not for everybody. The way that he's kind of tried to build it and talked about the NIL thing, which they're trying to get together. But it feels like at times he's kind of whined about how he has to construct a roster and build a program. He is one of the most he's one of the best coaches in the Big Ten. And the reason why I say that is because he's one of the best teachers that I've seen. During practice, he has a microphone, and he will call out teaching points for everybody on the field to hear, right? Like, the special teams segments that they do are very detailed and geared towards teaching the game of football. When there is an opportunity to talk about how a play affects the game situationally for his team, he will stop down and he will explain that to his guys. And I think when you're at Minnesota, you cannot be above saying that we're going to lean into teaching football, because we're not going to have the most loaded roster. And some of the mistakes that other teams can get away with, I can't do that. But what I can do is really lean into the idea that I got a bunch of smart guys around me who are willing to learn the game. And I think that's how you get to a point where certainly, You'd like to have a field goal kicker make the kick at the end of the game. And again, you mentioned some of the controversy with Michigan, the onside kick. I get all of that. But that's how you get to a point where a team gets super hot like this that's not expected to.
Everything you just said is so true. And, every year there's a small group of people that are saying we're done with PJ Fleck. And it's a good reminder, be careful what you wish for. I think some of the most impressive coaching jobs are done there in the middle of the conference. Yes. Are you winning above expectations? PJ's a guy that does it. Brett Bielema's a guy that does it. So you're right.
Kirk
PJ
Ferentz.
gets a lot of heat. Kirk Ferentz, absolutely. But give him his credit too. I hope the same people calling for him are giving him some credit for the job he's done this year.
Absolutely. But that'll do it for us over here on the Through the Whistle podcast, brought to you by the Chicago Sports Network. For Jake Butt, I'm Joshua Perry. You can catch us on the Big College Football Show Monday through Thursday on CHSN 5 Central. But until then, we'll talk to you.